Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, featuring author and ministry leader Kent Evans and business executive and military veteran Lawson Brown. This is a show for you, Dad. You want to be a godly and intentional father. Unfortunately, you've turned to these two knuckleheads for help. Let us know how that works out for you. Before we begin, remember this: you are not a father on accident, so go be a father on purpose. Please welcome your hosts, Kent and Lawson.
All right. So, Kent, that sounded like a cough. I didn't mean to just come right in and cough in your face. All you listeners, of which there
both
are.
Both of you listeners.
Both of.
Hello to Lawson's wife. Hello to Kent's wife. Good to see you two again, metaphorically speaking.
Oh my gosh. It's funny. Let's talk about something that is running rampant in this world. I struggle with it too. Find someone who says they're immune from it, and well, you finish the sentence. Let me read something to you. It's about comparison, which is what I think is rampant, and something that I have in and out of my life struggled with. I'm going to read this. My daughter sent this to me, a screenshot off of Instagram, something someone else posted. It says, the reason why we struggle with insecurity is because we compare our behind the scenes with everyone else's highlight reel.
Oh,
and I thought,
nice.
Girl, that is beautiful. I really appreciated her, first of all, that she sent that, but also that she noted that was noteworthy. Like, it's so hard, man. It's like we've talked about before with social media, and it just, it's always on. It's always in your face. The temptation to put yourself in a position where you are scanning constantly for how you measure up in our culture, period. First of all, it's easy. It's understandable, but it is no bueno. It is no good. It does not. That's what no bueno means.
Dude, man.
Or does it just mean
no good? We just reached a whole new audience with this show. Way to go. We're not internationally.
Yes, internationally acclaimed podcast to both of our wives. Hey, you know what though? Audrey is half Cuban.
See? There we go.
Yeah. So let's talk about comparison, man. What do you find in the audience of Manhood Journey?
Yeah. I think one of the temptations for dads specifically when it comes to this topic of comparison, which if we've got to prove to the guys listening that we live in the comparison society, I'm afraid you guys are asleep at the wheel. Like it's got to be at an all-time high, with social media ever since the dawn of time. I'm sure the Greeks compared themselves to the Romans, but they just couldn't do it.
Right.
They couldn't do it in real time. They couldn't do it in photographs. I definitely think one of the ways it plays out as a dad is as we guide our families, we look around, and in one sense, looking around is healthy, right? Paul said in Philippians, follow me as I follow Christ. So there's a real good biblical case for having an example to follow, as well as like wise counsel. All Proverbs 1 basically says, if you chuck counsel overboard, she's going to kick you in the teeth, so the idea of looking around for counsel and for wisdom, that's one thing. The idea, however, to look around as a dad and go, golly, is my family as cool as that family? Or do I make as much money as that guy? Or is my pedigree as impressive as that person's? Is my LinkedIn profile, how many followers do I got, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and on and up it adds. And so I think for dads, here's the way it tends to manifest itself. Let's not talk so much about the causes. Let's talk about the manifestations. And we'll try to get at them and find some antidotes to how we stop doing some of this. One of the ways it manifests itself is, I'll use a real simple example that probably will just get people all riled up, which is great. School choice. Your kids are 4 or 5 years old, and you're deciding how you might get them educated in what kind of format, right? So when I was a kid, you had public school, and then you basically had like Catholic schools. That's all I remember, at least as a kid, is you had like parish kind of schools that were propped up behind mostly like a Catholic church, in at least the part of the country where I grew up. And then you had public schools, and those were kind of your two choices. Now I think the flavors are much more, it's like Baskin Robbins. You do still have public school, of course. You have private schools of various flavors, and some are super pricey. And then you got this whole basket of like other methods. You got homeschool, you have Montessori, you got like 2 day a week, 3 day a week. You got all these choices. So I think the school choice options today are much broader than they were, say, 20, 30 years ago.
Which is super fantastic and fine.
Which I think is cool. And I think it's a little bit of a reaction to the public school system in a sense where it's like, we're going to try to find some other methods. It's kind of like solar energy. You know, we want to kind of get off of coal at some point. So we start experimenting with solar. So for me, the way this manifests itself as a dad is, so let's just take school choice. Okay. You say, well, we're going to send our kids to public school. And here's why. A, you know, it saves us some money, but also we want our kids to, you know, bump into the world and learn how to address culture on its own terms, and et cetera, right? We want to be involved in our community, and it's right down the street. Okay, great. There's all these great choices. You and your wife thought about it, prayed about it, talked about it, sought some counsel, and decided we're going to send them to public school. Immediately, if we're not careful, we start to justify that choice by finding all of the fault and the problems with the other choices. And so instead of just going, hey, Lawson, we decided to do school choice A. Isn't that cool? We decided to do school choice A because, man, all the B people and all the C people, they're just evil. They don't love their children. You know, they're just bad people. But here's the reason why that's happening. Because deep down, I'm not so sure in my decision, right? I'm not so sure. I don't know if God told me to do it or if culture did or I was just trying to save a buck. I don't know. So therefore, I got to go now start throwing rocks at the other decisions. And so we get into this comparison game. And I think we do it in church. I think we do it in our families. I think we do it in school choice. And at the root of it, it's almost like we want someone else either to tell us what to do so we can blame them if it doesn't work out, or we want to get to this place where in order to make my decision make sense, I've got to make the other decision sound stupid.
Bro. Yeah. And it can become the label. Like, it shouldn't define you. Your choice of how you've chosen to put your kids through a school, whatever the system is or process is, that's not now going to become your family's label. You know, like, you don't own that in all aspects of your life. And then therefore everyone who is not that is less than or wrong or really headed down a wrong path.
The thing that I look at in this sense from a spiritual standpoint is where we see throughout the New Testament when God inspired Paul and others to talk about the body of Christ and how each of the members of the body that we're called have different functions and gifts and purposes, and that Ephesians 2:10, like the good work he called me to do might be different than the good work he called Lawson to do. And sometimes we can't quite handle that. Like mentally, you know, you're the pinky or you're the eyeball or you're the left hand, and Satan wants to get in there and go, oh man, pinkies don't matter. Yeah. Left hands don't matter.
Why do you pick you for that? That's not very good. Yeah. You know, just being transparent, I've had the thought before with you and me. How many years? We go back, what, 20 years?
I mean, like 19 too many, that's for sure.
How much am I getting paid for this? 0? Is that right?
Actually, it's quite the opposite. Lawson is one of our donors. You're funding this episode. This episode brought to you by Lawson Brown.
Brought to you by me. No.
How far do we go back?
I was about to say, though, like, I'm really proud of you and respect what you've done with this ministry, which is why I feel so strongly about the financial support, the conversations that we have, this podcast. But I have thought, like, man, what is that all I am? You know, just a donor, you know, a helper. Like, look, why did God pick Kent to do his ministry work? You know, like, what am I missing? I don't really believe that in my heart. You know what I'm saying? But it's like, it's, you know, that's not my role. That's what he picked you for.
What's interesting about what you're saying is, number one, on this podcast, you are my very favorite donor. Like, seriously, of the people on this podcast talking with the microphone, you're the top number one most favorite guy who's not named Kent. Like, for real. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart.
I take back what I said.
What's interesting about what you're saying is you just reflected back what we even do in the church, right? So, for example, we look at somebody like, we glorify, and this, again, I'm on a slippery slope here. So, like, you know, this may listen all the way to the end of this section, please. We glorify the guy who decides to go, sell everything and go to China and be a missionary, or go to some dark place and be a missionary. And then we say nothing about the single mom who's holding it all together by working 2 jobs. We don't say anything about her because she didn't do the big spiritual thing of becoming a missionary. And we, even in the church, that's how Satan weaves his way in to our thought process. Is there's even like a pecking order inside like Christendom, where it's like, oh, so, what do you do for God? Well, I lead a Bible study on Sundays. Oh, that's cute. You're like a 8, on the scale. That's like number 1 is the best. What do you do for God? Oh, well, I volunteer as a elder, a deacon. Oh, shucks, man, you're a 4. You're almost near the top. You're near the number 1 spot. What do you do? I'm a missionary. Oh my gosh, I finally met someone who's Wait a minute. Most of the guys I know who are doing amazing mission work are doing it on soccer fields and in PTA meetings and in their jobs that they're leading their companies ethically. Like, I was on the phone recently with a CEO of a $40 million company, and we were talking about his business, and his heart's passion was to lead that business in a way that glorified God, blessed his employees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he's not a missionary. Or Lawson, or is he? And I think that's the challenge. Is we want to compare. Even in the church, we want to compare who's doing more or less work for God by whether or not their paycheck is super uncertain and comes from donors, or their paycheck comes from like some Fortune 250. That's not God's economy. That's not how he compares.
After the break, let's talk about ways to avoid it, ways to resist it. Like, I need it myself, just in general. It's hard not to. I wish I were more fill in the blank, more fit, more spiritually
Would you like me to
gifted,
fill in the blank? I got like a lot if you want me to. Hang on, everybody. Kent's going to fill in all the blanks.
Oh, you're so stupid.
True. Well, I think let me leave the guys before we hit the break. Let's talk about maybe a few areas where we're probably tempted to compare, and then we'll come on the other side and address those as you've described, Lawson. One is, I think, quickly in the area of money. It's a very quick one. We tend to compare ourselves in money. I make X, you make 2X. I'm half as good as you are. That's kind of how we think. We aggrandize, especially Western culture. If you're living in America and you're listening to this podcast, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Number 2, we compare ourselves in terms of power. How much influence do I have? How many people are quote unquote under me at work, and that whole thing? Money, power. We do compare ourselves in terms of like what I'll call the vanity comparisons, like looks and our level of attractiveness and all that. Am I as handsome as so-and-so? And we compare in that regard. And then I think we compare ourselves, especially as dads, we compare our marriage to other marriages, and we compare our children to other people's children.
So we just compare our family, Ben.
Yeah, we compare our family. And I think, man, it's such a slippery slope, because in some ways you do want to learn, right? I really love to be around guys who are really good dads. And I ask them questions. I ask you questions all the time about adult children, because your kids are all older than mine. And so you've been down some steps that I haven't been down. That's not comparison. That's counsel. I want your wisdom, but I don't need my kids to be just like yours. And so let's talk about those areas. We've got to hit all of them, but there's kind of the power and money and influence factors. There's the family factors. And then there's, I think the last one is like the spiritual factor, where the guy who can say in any given meeting, where the guy who can just go, I appreciate this conversation, but let's just go to the Lord in prayer. And he may be just wanting to go to the Lord in prayer. Brilliant. Glad he's in the meeting. He may be flashing his spiritual amazingness card because he doesn't know what to do with this conversation. So he's just going to throw out the trump card. I could dip down to talk with all you other humans, but instead, I think we got to be careful of that as well. Let's, on the flip side of the break, talk about that.
That's real talk, dude. Let's do it.
Hey, Dad, sometimes you need weekly encouragement on your father journey. That's why we built a community of men that are basically the Navy SEALs of godly fatherhood. They are all located at fatheronpurpose.org. That's fatheronpurpose.org. Now, that is a monthly subscription of just 11 measly US dollars. And when you join that community, you will get action items that are brief and biblical, and you can put into play right away. Every week, we release a dad mission video that is a short devo based on the Bible with an action item mission at the end, super practical. And plus, as a bonus, when you dive in, you get digital courses, ebooks, all kinds of other resources, not to mention you're connected with dozens of other godly dads who are walking through the same issues you're walking through. And that community is very rich and vibrant. Come check it out today at fatheronpurpose.org. That's fatheronpurpose.org. So, Lawson, here we are on the flip side of our commercial, whatever was in the middle there. We drop a few different ones in. I don't know what you were just asked to do on this specific episode, but whatever it was, go do it, man. Pull over the car you're driving and get it done. Okay. We talked about comparison, and let's talk about the family comparison. I know we have a lot of dads listening, and they've probably heard the talks about money and power and sex and fame and power and all that stuff and influence. Let's talk about family comparison. What do you think some dads are tempted to do when it comes to like comparing their family against some other family? How does that normally look for a dad?
You may have different opinion on this. I think mothers do that pretty naturally, pretty easily, pretty quickly. If you know another guy pretty well, and you're both dads and you're in the right kind of trusted environment, and it's, kind of air quote, okay to talk openly about it, then I think you get more like real conversation. But usually the talk is, so what do you do for a living? And then it goes from there. And that's the comparison. That's how it begins. And like I can tell you firsthand experience, it's been a long time, but when I had a quote high-powered title at one time, I couldn't wait for that question to come my way. Man, my ego just thrived on it.
I
was
basically
gross,
run your life, even though you don't understand that I run your life.
Dude, I was just ate up with the title and chasing money. And so when you said that about money and power and how many direct reports do you have and how big is your business, that rings true. Dads start there and then get into propping up what their family life is really like. Like I said in the beginning about we compare our behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reels. I think we just generally are tempted to lead with our highlight reel unless we are in a genuine relationship with someone who has got your best interests. I wrote something down earlier and you kind of hit on it too. Comparison is different from comparing notes with, a trusted, faithful partner.
Did I say that?
No. If you will let me.
I thought you. In case you guys can't tell, we make this podcast up as we go along. Like there's really almost very little scripting ahead of time.
I said, not you. Different from comparing notes.
When I hear good quotes, I tend to think I probably said them.
And different from challenging each other, which is what I think men are attracted to do. Like when you're in a trusted relationship with another guy that you honestly know has got your best interest and your kids and maybe knows them a little bit better. But I think until then, man, a lot of us just kind of posture and promote our highlight reels.
Yeah, man, that's true. I love what you said. Comparison isn't the same thing as comparing notes. That is brilliant. Way to go, Kent. Good job. It's funny you say that because I recall one time meeting a guy at a breakfast in our city, and I asked him what he did. And he told me he worked at a particular company. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So as the conversation wore on, we eventually traded business cards, and then, we parted ways. A little while later, I found his business card in my pocket and I pulled it out and it said CEO and president. And I remember thinking, he didn't say I founded, I'm a multi-millionaire business leader, which were all true. He just said, I work at a company. And I thought, wow. I never forgot it. That was probably 1999. That was over 20 years ago. I remember when I met this guy, roughly. And I just thought, oh my goodness, that's so good. I saw a quote the other day, John Acuff, the author. I think he's hilarious. I love John. And he said he was with a billionaire in some kind of business. Evidently, it was the restaurant business. And Acuff said that whenever he was with this billionaire a few times, and whenever this billionaire, someone would ask him what he did, he would say, I'm in customer service. And he was the owner of this big chain of something, and he would just say, I'm in customer service. And then he would just move on and ask them a question about themselves. And I think that's really important. The marriage and relational expert, John Gottman, talks about bids for connection. I don't know if he invented the idea, but it's the idea that when we go to a social event, like you mentioned a minute ago, and we say, hey, what do you do? What that is it's a bid for connection. What I mean is, it's almost like I'm holding out a thing, and I'm bidding. I'm holding out a nickel and seeing if you'll hand a nickel back to me. I'm trying to connect with you, and I'm trying to find a seamless, easy way to connect. What do you do? And then over time, if you keep responding to my bids for connection, the amounts go up. Like in a sense that we can connect at a higher level, we can connect at a deeper level. And so if my bid for connection is what do you do? Sometimes though, we turn those bids for connection into bids for competition. Right. And what I'm saying is, here's what I do. What do you do? And deep down, to your point, you were itching to have someone ask you, what do you do? Because you knew your job
I would
title
ask
was
them
impressive.
what they did so that they would have to then ask me.
Dude, that's real. That's so real. Hey, what's your little thing that you do? So when you're done, I can talk some more.
Yeah, no, gosh, I just cringe. I look back on myself going, I wonder how many people I was doing that with and in my own head. And then they leave the conversation. And it was that CEO that you mentioned that said, I'm in customer service. And he was just shaking his head like, what an immature little brat.
I think it was C.S. Lewis who said something like, I'm not going to quote him exactly, but he said something like, if you meet a truly humble person, what you're going to think after you talked with them for a while is, it was interesting to me how interested that person was in me. Like, so when you meet a truly humble person, your reaction is going to be, golly, they really seemed interested in me. Because they're not, by definition, the humble person isn't self-absorbed, which means they're others absorbed. Like they're thinking about other people. And I think for us as dads, the comparison game only leads us to one of two places, right? There's no good outcome where you go, there's not really a neutral. There's a downshift where if we're comparing ourselves against other people who are farther along than we are, like for example, I've got my third book coming out this summer. At the time we're going to record this, we're recording this podcast, and I tend to compare myself to other authors, which is awful because I lose every one. It's like literally there's almost no authors I can compare myself to where I'm ahead. So seriously, I mean, true story. The one thing we do is we compare ourselves to the experts in our field or the dude who's been at it a lot longer or whatever, and we feel sad. So outcome number one is despondency and sad and self-recrimination. And we're like, I'm never going to make it. I'm not Max Lucado. I guess I'll just stop, And that's kind of comparison one. Or the other side is we compare ourselves, and this is what I've done. A couple guys have entered into the book space, and honestly, Lawson, seriously, their books are terrible. I mean, awful. Like bad grammar. There's typos throughout them. The covers are awful. Like they don't have a UPC code. I'm like, man, who did your book cover? And my temptation is to compare myself to those guys and go, what an idiot. And so that's just pride, right? So the only two outcomes of comparison we tend to find ourselves with is either deep sadness or cocky arrogance. Those are usually the only two outcomes.
I don't know who said it, but isn't there some quote like comparison is the thief? I'm looking it up. Comparison is the thief of joy. Unless you're comparing yourself to loser book guys that you
who would do
scour
that?
The earth for.
What bad person would do something like that? I definitely think, and here's what happens. The encouragement I want to give dads. I want to end on a high note. Number one, my book's better than your book. That's the high note for you. No. What I'd like to do is I want to kind of end as let's have the plane be lifting up as we end. And here's what I want to give dads is a couple kind of like antidotes to comparison. One antidote is faithfulness. And here's what I mean by that. As a dad, we can look around and go, well, golly, that guy's kids got into Harvard, or that guy's kids, they all went on mission trips, or that guy's kids never seem angry, or whatever, right? And we look around family-wise, or we're comparing ourselves to this other guy and how much money he has, or his vacation homes, or whatever. And one of the antidotes to that whole mess is faithfulness. And what I mean by that is, what has God asked you to do? I think of the scripture in the Old Testament when God's talking to Moses, and he says to Moses, when Moses is fighting him about going to the Pharaoh, he says, what is that in your hand? What is that in your hand? And Moses is like, well, staff. And God says, with you and that staff, we're going to do something amazing. And what I think part of the message to that part of Moses' experience with God is, God's going, hey, look, man, I gave you that staff. Like, you got that thing. And I want you to be faithful with that thing. And so you might be the dad of a family who all you can afford to do for vacation is go like to the Piggly Wiggly and get an extra bag of Oreo cookies. That's your vacation this summer. Well, you don't got to compare yourself to the dude who took his whole family to Europe on a cruise. You were faithful to what God gave you in the moment. And for me, faithfulness is the answer. So as Mark Batterson said in his book, Circle Maker, he talks about guys like me who are going to write. He's like, if God told you to write, go write. And if the books don't sell, who cares? That's his problem. Maybe you're a bad marketer. Maybe you need a better PR person. But at the end of the day,
maybe that wasn't God's purpose.
Right. The whole point is, I felt like I did my part. I wrote the thing. And so at the end of the day, we got to just be faithful to the call. It's like Ephesians 2:10. God has prepared good works for you, Lawson, to do, and for Kent to do. I don't got to do Lawson's works, and Lawson doesn't have to do my works. Now, sometimes we might be called to do something together like this podcast, but at the end of the day, Dad, just be faithful. What is that you have in your hand? Who are those people you have under your roof? Let's be discipling those people. Let's be engaged in their lives, and let's leave some of the comparisons behind. That's one antidote I think we can discuss as it relates to faithful, to comparison, is how to be faithful. What's one or two things, Lawson, that come to mind for you that a dad who's kind of struggling in this area of comparison, what would you say to that dad if he's listening in?
It's okay right now. Like, you're not alone. Don't feel like you alone are the one that struggles with this. We all do. Find somebody that you can talk to and be real with and ask for their help. Ask a partner to pray with you about it. Be real before God and ask for help. And then you'll become more and more adept at recognizing when you're doing it. And you'll feel the joy returning and the contentment that can rest on you when comparison begins to dissolve in your life. And you can do it.
And also, please go buy some of my books so that my fragile ego can make it to the next podcast episode halfway intact. I think is what you meant to say. I've been playing back what you actually said and what you meant to say. The good news is, if a guy does get off this podcast and decides to go buy one of my books, he'll actually move the needle. Like we'll notice it.
That's what I'm afraid of.
We'll notice it.
Yeah.
We're like, if you go buy one more of like Rick Warren's books or Max Lucado's books, he won't even notice.
Yeah, he'll never
you
even
think
notice.
He's going to appreciate you? He's not going to appreciate you. Okay. You're like customer 11,987,492. But for me, I will notice it.
You're going to be customer number 7. Whoa.
Well, let's not get carried away.
Yeah. Hey, I wrote this down for next time. I wrote challenge I added to our list. Challenge to faithfulness, because we've talked before about some of it is you just got to be better disciplined. You just got to work harder, and you got to ask for help from God more often. Yeah, right. So it is something that we dads need to challenge each other. We've got to be the flag that is stuck in the ground that doesn't move, and we are faithful.
Amen, brother. Hey, thanks for listening this week, guys. We're pumped, and we can't wait to come to you next week with the Power Packed episode. We'll see you on the other side. God bless. Hey, Dad, thank you for listening to today's show. If you found this episode helpful, remember, you can get all the content and show notes at manhoodjourney.org/podcast. And if you really liked it, please consider doing 3 things. Number 1, share this podcast with someone. You can hit the share button in your app, wherever you listen to podcasts, or just call the person up and tell them to listen in. Number 2, subscribe to this podcast so you get episodes automatically. That helps us as well to help dads find the show. You can do that through your favorite listening app, whatever that is. And finally, review this podcast. Leave us a review, good or bad, wherever you listen. Those reviews also help other dads find the show. You can always learn more about what we're up to at manhoodjourney.org or fatheronpurpose.org. We will see you next week.
You've been dozing off to the Father on Purpose podcast featuring Kent Evans and Lawson Brown. Now, wake up. Head over to fatheronpurpose.org for more tools that can help you be a godly, intentional, and not completely horrible dad. Remember, you are not a father on accident, so go be a father on purpose.